what would it look like to audit your current expenses to understand the price that you're paying as well as the value that we're receiving for it? It's something that Shawn and I worked through today and how he's been able to save companies tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Today, we'll specifically go through what the audit is like, the types of companies that it's beneficial for, the process, as well as really the outcome and what you can expect longer term. This isn't just a one-time thing. This is a continuous thing that they can do over a period of years. And he even talks about how some customers keep him essentially for life. For you as a business owner, especially in the 7 or 8 figure mark, you're really going to find that cutting costs is not necessarily a big focus of yours, but it definitely has a big opportunity simply because it's something that you're not immediately aware of. And Shawn and his team do this as a done for you type service where ultimately they take a percentage of the savings. You're not even having to come out of pocket for any of this as well. If you were going to hire an employee to help look through and analyze some of this stuff, that would be a hard sunk cost. So today we're going to go through that in this. And if you can see behind me, I'm still in Gulf Shores here for the Sand in My Boots Country Music Festival. Going to be a great one this weekend, and it's also going to be a great episode for you to tune into. So if I'm a business owner who always wants to do everything myself, I want to talk through specifically today of like how much time I'm actually spending in terms of reducing costs and what even is that potential cost savings for some of the vendors that I have. So you work specifically with companies who, have some of these service providers and really just reducing not just the cost, but also looking at the values and the services to, find something at the same service level or better, which is, incredible. But what would you say are like the 4 sort of tips or things that you could think if I was a business owner, do it myself, or like, what would I do to initially reduce costs within my own business?
Yeah, there's some general things you can do, but I can go a little bit more specific because every category is a little bit specific. Simply, one of the things you can do for waste is monitor, the amount of waste you're using and making sure that your dumpsters are absolutely full. Typically, when you go, obviously it could vary from week to week. You want to make sure on the other side of that, you want to make sure if we're talking waste that your bins are not overfull because they'll charge an overfull charge. And if you have a few of those week after week, that really adds up. And so monitoring how much waste you're going and monitoring, making sure you're optimized in that. In telecom, there's many things you can do in telecom. One thing that I'm finding right now, especially in high tech companies, a lot of people are using what they call the BYOD. That's bring your own device, and it's where people are using their own cell phones for their company phone, and so that's saving the company a massive amount of money, as well as, the companies would just, add something onto their paycheck, or they give them a stipend each month to cover that. And so that saves a ton of money. Obviously, you want to make sure you got the security, features that are necessary for your company in that situation. Also, voice over internet protocol, VoIP, as it's known as, is another big change that's shifted in the last 5 to 10 years. There's still some companies. I had to talk to a law firm last week, and they're like, we have an archaic phone system. We desperately need help, and we don't know where to start. And so people out there know that this exists, voice over internet protocol, and that can drastically change your phone calls, your phone bills for sure. Features in a lot of our cost categories. A lot of people add on features to their products that are not needed at all, and a lot of times these features are pretty cheap for them to add on, but they certainly add a lot more to the cost of your bill. And so going through your features, like, are we using this? Do we need call waiting? Do we need, we actually have a service that does call, that answers our phones. Why are we paying for voicemail? We have a service that does this. So there's a lot of overlap in that. And then finally, in telecom, it's just monitoring the data, monitoring the usage. A lot of companies are paying way more data than they absolutely need. Or, they get locked into an unlimited data supply, but they're like, we're not using much at all. So why are we paying the unlimited number? It sounds great, but if we could reduce our costs, do we actually need that much? And do we need, international calling when, we're paying for international calling with all our phones, but no one's, maybe 2 people in the office are calling international. So just going through your features. So those are a few things that people can do, especially for telecom. And these are the types of things that we'll go through and have conversations with our clients before we dive into talking with the providers to reduce their costs.
Yeah. And certainly I know you do a number of different things in terms of, cost saving, options. What does this kind of mean for me as a business owner? So I could just hear, hey, telecom, waste, kind of monitoring data. Okay, sounds great. That sounds like, two pennies to me. I'm going to go focus on, building more of the business. And rightfully though, they should, right? Like in the other episode, how there's not someone at the company who intentionally is focused on cost reduction. If they're, in a manufacturing kind of standpoint, potentially they have it from a project standpoint, right? In terms of like a Lean Six Sigma, type of, individual,
Sure.
but not necessarily from a service provider sort of piece, right? So this position doesn't exist within companies, right? Or it would just be a loss leader, especially because they also don't have the relationships and the connections that, you and the organization does. For over 30 years. You have this data of different providers with different value services, with knowing what like the competition is. So again, it's kind of this idea of like, why as a business owner, do I care? Is it really finding two pennies in the couch, or am I looking for, $100 bill?
Yeah, well, a lot of the times people will say, oh, we monitor our invoices. We have somebody in there monitoring invoices. Well, that's great. You're monitoring your invoices that you're way overpaying for. Monitoring invoices doesn't mean you know what the other people are paying. It just means that, okay, I know it didn't go up 20% from last month. So, in our last call, we talked about an example where I'm potentially saving a client 84% on their waste costs. Well, they've been monitoring that invoice for the last 5 years, and they're like, yep, it hasn't jumped massively, but they've been way overpaying for that time. And so even if you are monitoring invoices, you don't know what the competition's paying. And that's the big part where we come in. It's like, we know what a baseline, we know how low, at what service levels industry standards are for our categories. And that's where we come in and we'll say, we can eyeball things pretty quick and be like, wow, they are way overpaying. Like, and we haven't even dived into it yet.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that's been a fascinating thing. Yeah. We talked about another episode of just, we sit on hold for you. I don't know. That's really was another thing to keep in mind in terms of not just me as a business owner, hiring someone, like yourself, but also, Scully Mitchell has a specific value prop to it, right? You're not paid on commission for the services you have with companies, right? It's simply the, cost savings. So that's another, advantage. But this idea around, hey, yes, there's, dollars in this for me as the business owners to potentially look, but then also I can outsource this, right? And, create value with it. So tell us, specifically, like, how are you compensated and what's the process? I know you talked or, can talk through the initial audit, the timeline, and then, if you maybe don't find savings, what kind of happens with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And just back to your last one a bit of like, is this peanuts and I want to make a $4 million deal and why am I worrying about hundreds of dollars here and there? And a lot of times it is significant. A lot of times we are saving people 20, 30, 40, $100,000 in a year on their expenses. And the other side of it is like, if I gave you $400 bills and said, rip it up and throw it in the garbage, would you do that? No, that's money. That's real money that you're saving. That's going to go into your pocket that right now you're overpaying someone else. So just wanted to touch on that. But yeah. And so in terms of the timeline and kind of how our payment structure works, once you agree that you want us to do this audit, we have two steps. It's kind of the service agreement and then the value report. So at first we sign a service agreement, and that, like I said, it says you want us to do this for you. You're going to provide the information for you. We lay out how our payment structure works if you decide to go forward, and that, you're not going to mess with us in terms of you're not going to go and start renegotiating on your own on the side. Once you engage us, you're saying, yeah, I want you to we're allowing you to do the negotiation, and we're going to let you do it for the next 3 years, the length of the contract. Obviously, we got to protect ourselves. We don't want to do all this research and then have them take that, those numbers and say, hey, give me these. You gave them to Scully Mitchell, because we say, you're not going to get Scully Mitchell pricing elsewhere. So you have to agree to that. So that's our service agreement. And then we take about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on several things, to do this audit. And this audit it's a no cost audit, I should say. So there's no upfront fee. So there's no risk at any of this. We're doing a free audit of your category. Let's take the telecom category. And so we'll ask you for the last 3 months minimum of your invoice statements from your telecom company. A lot of times people just give us our login and we'll go in and check out their statements. We're not getting a login to change your plan or anything. It's just a view only, see your statements. We'll analyze those statements. We're analyzing for any errors, any omissions. We're checking the plan you're on to make sure you're optimized for the right plan. Once we've done all that, then we'll go in and talk with your incumbent vendor. So the vendor you're currently working with, we'll negotiate with them to try to get a better rate. and then we'll talk to 2 competitors and get their rates as well. Once we've all done all that, we gather all that information into what we call a value report. And that value report is going to show you the baseline numbers that we came up with from your past invoices. And then it's going to show you the savings that we found with your incumbent vendor and your competitors, at least 2 of the competitors. And then we'll make a recommendation. And sometimes that recommendation might not always be the baseline cheapest cost, because we could say, yeah, hey, this one is cheaper, but this is the service level that they're going to provide for that. And it might not be what you want. Or in terms of merchant processing, it could say, yeah, this one's cheaper, but they're adding like a monthly bill for your terminal. You got to pay $60 a month for your terminals. Whereas this one over here is a bit more expensive, but the terminals are included. Or this one over here is more expensive, but it really integrates into QuickBooks, where this one over here doesn't integrate in QuickBooks. It's a cheaper price, but you said integration to QuickBooks was really important to you. So maybe it's better to pay a higher one. So it's not all, so that we explain all of that in this value report.
Yeah.
And if they like what you see in the value report, if you like the cost savings that we've found for you and you go with our recommendation, then we will move ahead. We'll sign the agreement. So that's a contract for 3 years. And then we will go ahead and help you with the implementation of that, especially if it's a new provider. And, 80% of the time we stay with the current provider. Some people are really concerned that we're going to switch providers because maybe they have a special relationship, or they know the equipment really well, or they know the software really well. And they're like, I don't really want to leave them, but I know I'm paying too much. Most of the time, we actually do stay with the current provider, because those providers know that it's cost a lot more to get a new client than it is to keep your own clients. And so they're definitely incentivized to keep them. And then over the next 3 years, we have what we call a post-audit team. And that team is analyzing your invoices for the next 3 years. So every invoice that comes in, they're watching for any errors, omissions, any changes, any service fees, any fuel surcharges, any of those things. And we're getting them taken away, because we have those built into the agreement that they're not allowed. And we are picking up on that as they go. And then once you get an invoice in, when we see that savings from your baseline invoices, that's when I will be invoicing you, and it'll be 50% of that savings. So yeah, if you got $1,000 bill and we're going to save you $500, I'll be invoicing you $250 a month for that 3-year contract. And then after 3 years, you get 100% of the savings.
Yeah. Why is it 3 years?
3 years, we found it balances out to the amount of work that we do in terms of creating that value report, but also we need to see that length of time and that consistency over time, because if there's going to be price creep, it's going to happen within that 3 years. A lot of times, companies will just start, once you get, especially phone companies, like they get you in for a deal, right? No deal is a 3-year deal with a phone company. It's always a 6-month deal. And then you're going to forget about it. And then the price is going to go back up to normal for the next 10 years that you have your plan. And so that allows us to watch that track over there, to track those increases over time and to make sure that they're not happening, because within a 3-year period, most people will see significant increases in their vendor bills in these categories. And we make sure that they're not seeing them. And, a lot of some other franchises are actually moving to 4 years with their commitments, and people are even more comfortable with that, because they're like, this is great. Like, it's off my hands. I don't need to think about it. I need to focus on other parts of my business.
Yeah. I mean, would a service provider know when a company's using Schooley Mitchell still, or no?
Yeah, generally, because we've negotiated the contract with them.
Okay. Because I'm just thinking,
and we're the face of their client.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I'm just thinking, if like you were there for 3 or 4 years and then no longer got emails from Shawn, and now you're going back to the original person, the business owner, it's like, okay, well, time to skyrocket things, right? So
it could potentially.
So you mentioned that. I mean, there's some companies you work with that are just like, hey, just like stay on and do this, right? Because there's no issue really with that, right? As the business, there's it's not a sunk cost, right? It's only value.
Yeah, it's paying for itself, and
ebbing and flowing with the market and the business needs and features and services, especially with AI coming to be. Some of these things could be completely obsolete, but they still you still be paying for it by all means.
Yeah, and after those 3 years, we'll do, if you want to stay on for another 3 years, we'll do a whole new market analysis during that time, and make sure we're still optimized. And over that 3 years, we are still doing the analysis, and we find out other deals that are going on, or we look at other providers, things like that. So we're always kind of looking to optimize that category throughout the whole 3 years.
Yeah, certainly. All right. Well, we'll put, description information on, how to contact you specifically, because you work with companies in both the US and Canada.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. And what are the typical type of companies that you work with? I mean, it seems like you can work with anyone, but really there seems like a level that, above a certain kind of revenue amount tends to be the best.
Yeah, usually about $5 million revenue, but we've worked with companies hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And I've worked with companies that are less than $1 million, but but probably $5 to $10 million revenue and up, kind of 10 to 40 employees. Yeah. So it's it's not an exact science, but the more expenses you have, the chances we're going to find a lot more savings. And manufacturing are really big in terms of different categories that we can help, but there's not many businesses we can't help. And we also work with nonprofits as well. It works all of the same for nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits have credit card services to accept
Yeah.
thousands and thousands and millions of dollars in donations.
Sure.
And, a 0.5% here and there or 0.25% here and there savings on a credit card processing can make a significant difference for these nonprofits. And then we also work with government organizations, municipalities. Municipalities obviously have like millions of dollars in expenses of these categories. And so, yeah, it's not limited for sure to private businesses.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. And yeah, we have, another episode that we went through in terms of the details of like tactically, money savings, what that's like, what some of those, services pieces are, and, a lot more detail on that with the financials of auditing and, some key examples. But we'll save that for the other video. But Shawn, thanks for coming on for here to kind of describe some of the, time pieces and just kind of the mental piece too, right? Like, sure, I could do this myself, but ultimately, do I want to? And more importantly, if I wanted to, do I have the best tools, not just negotiation tactics, right?
Right.
But tools, again, with the 30 years of experience that you have with, or Scully Mitchell has with these vendors to then know, hey, this actually isn't the best deal that you can get. And here's the market research in terms of other vendors with these people who are doing the analysis, and not just me going to Google or ChatGPT for 5 minutes and saying, I'm spending the same amount of time and level of detail that you and your team would, right? Mm-hmm. That would just not be the case. So it's great insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have, software that analyzes these bills to make sure they're optimized. And our software is always growing and increasing and changing, obviously, with the developments of AI. And we're utilizing that all the time as well.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Shawn. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you bet.